What is up, people? Thank you so much for joining us on our new relaunch of our podcast. My name is David Harris, and I'll be joined today by a guest that we're going to discuss a topic that I think is increasingly important. It is very important in our community, and that is part of the juvenile justice system upon which many of our young people are unfortunately a part of, and what we can do to better understand that. And I really appreciate any of you who take the time to watch this show. Please, as always, subscribe the page, and any suggestions or any participation that you may be willing to provide and give to us to help make this show better, and more importantly, our community a better place, is totally welcome. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest, Mr. Christopher Ambers, juvenile probation officer working with the Dallas Youth Village in the Dallas, Texas area. Mr. Ambers, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Mr. Harris, for having me here.
It is my pleasure, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you have a lot going on. So first of all, I'm going to get to, I'd like for you to tell the audience, a little about yourself, what you do and why you chose to get into the arena that you are in currently.
Okay, well, first of all, my name is Christopher Ambers. I'm originally from Louisiana, Monroe, Louisiana to be exact. I didn't get off into the juvenile field. The juvenile field got off in me. So it wasn't a field that I had originally designed to be in. I went to school in mind of wanting to be a occupational therapist. So I was in the medical field in Louisiana, and one of the things that brought me here to Dallas was Texas Women's University had a master's occupational therapy program here that I was wanting to get into. So I was coming here to get established as a residency. Well, when I finished college, I went to California, stayed with my parents, and I worked at a place out there temporarily working with youth in between, and a place called Carice Youth Center out in Oakland, California. So that kind of got me involved with kids. I'd already kind of, I'm the oldest grandchild, the first generation of boys to graduate high school and then college. And that led on to other my cousins that graduated after me. But when I left California, I worked there for a year working with the kids, and they kind of threw me in the fire and working with kids. I was doing some teaching, and I'm like, how did it end up happening? But I kind of enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed working with kids, but my main thing was the medical field, trying to chase the money and do all that. Well, came to Dallas, didn't have a job, sitting around waiting, try to find something. I was doing all the odds and end jobs, and just went on the Dallas County website and applied for a position called Juvenile Residential Officer, which is working with kids. So I applied for that and got the job. And, 28 years later, I'm still here. That wasn't a long-term goal, but that was a short-term goal. I got in and kind of, got to enjoying working with the kids. I was working on the line staff with the kids. I was working directly with them, mentoring them as teaching them the basic things, how to tie ties, social skills, how to appropriately, follow instructions, things that we take for granted that our parents taught us that these kids don't know just naturally. They don't know the steps in following instructions or how to disagree appropriately and things like that. That's something that we assume that everyone knows, but those are things that has to be taught. And that's something that, we'll get a chance to talk later on about that I think is missing with our kids. We assume they know these things and we don't really know at heart. But Big Mama made sure that we knew what things what was appropriate and that you couldn't do this on Sunday, and nobody played games on Sunday. We had rules.
Yes, we did.
Making them as we go. So I started working at Dallas County, and I worked as a juvenile residential officer, and I moved around and got elevated up pretty quickly. Then a probation officer position came available, and they put me in a position temporarily while they were looking for someone. I kind of enjoyed it, but I enjoyed working more directly with the kids. And, this job here was going to have me Monday through Friday, pushing paper, but I want to be as directly involved with kids. So I thought, and I hesitated to take the job. My wife was like, no, you're taking that job Monday through Friday. You're taking it. But it's a job that I hadn't looked back on. Like I say, 28 years later, I'm still here, involved in the juvenile system. I gave up on chasing money, and I decided to actually make a difference in life. But I enjoyed doing what I was doing. It wasn't about chasing money. I can make money doing other things, and that's what I've done to help
Mm-hmm.
some doing here because I actually enjoy going to work. Sometimes I over enjoyed it when I first started the job. I'd be on vacation, I'm calling back, checking on the kids. So eventually you have to separate yourself from work and play, which I eventually did. But I still have a passion for what I do with these kids, and that's why I'm still here today. And that's what got me involved.
Wow.
On top of
That
that,
is
also,
that is an incredible story that how you fell off into that. Well, I believe and I would imagine that a lot of those kids, if they aren't familiar, they should be thankful that that you went into that industry, because it definitely seems as though you really do care about this mission, and you wouldn't be in this apparently if you didn't.
right,
That's
right.
pretty obvious. Now, let me go back on something that you said just a moment ago when you talked about them, the skill sets, some basics that we got. And I love, the big mama term, because we grew up with a hierarchy
Right.
in our lives. And we really, as I like to tell my kids as well, our parents and grandparents, they didn't really care about how you felt about something when they
Right.
knew they were telling you the right thing.
That's
And
correct.
I think as Denzel once said in one of his movies, this is not a democracy, it is a dictatorship. I am the law. That's how we operated within our family structures. And they don't have these family structures. So if you could elaborate just a little bit more on those skill sets, those rules that we operated under that they don't, and their understanding of it to how you see it.
Well, a lot of it has to go back to the mere fact that these kids don't have a guilty conscience about doing something wrong, and we knew the difference between right and wrong. We knew that we couldn't go in grandmama pocketbook, or we knew if they said come home, we didn't have watches. Our watch was a street light. They said be home by the street light, and we did it. One thing I tell my parents when I'm working with them too is, if our parents told us to be home at 7 o'clock, we came home at 7:01, there were consequences. These kids,
Amen.
they limit, and that's something that I'm real firm with my kids on, is limit testing, because we have a lot of kids that are going to limit test. You tell them to be home at 7 o'clock, they come at 7:01, and you let them get away with it. Then it's going to be 7:15, 7:30, then all night. And that's what's going on with some of the kids in the juvenile system. These kids are thinking that they can just do small things and get away with them without any large consequences until it's too late. So we operate on a different function, back then, where we had a set of rules and we had morals and all those things. And some of these kids, which you can't dictate it or make that as an excuse right now, but some of these kids are a product of babies having babies, where these kids were raised and born by 16-year-old parents, because I get 32-year-old parents, and that's not a knock on them, but you got to look at the fact that they're 16 and now they got this boy, and they're not raising them as mama, they're raising them as like a brother sister type relationship.
That's right.
And there's no structure with that, and that's what I see. That's a lot of problems that I have, and I see as a product of babies having babies, and they don't really know how to discipline them. They want to give them everything they want, and they're part of the microwave generation right now. And we wasn't the microwave. If we wanted something, we had to wait. These kids now, they want it right then and there. If the Jordan's coming out on August the 15th, they want the mama to have the money. If mama don't get paid to August 30th, that's a problem. Then they're gonna figure out how to go get the sale, be it may rob, steal, or whatever. So that's part of the problem, is these kids are not taught any the morals that we had.
So, and I'm going to follow up before we move on to the next topic I want to hit to, which is totally germane to what you were just saying, and that is that when you spoke about working with the parents and you spoke on the babies having babies situation, and that was big in our generation coming up through the 80s. And I have to wonder, when you speak on limit testing and working with the parents, is that something that even the parents, because what I found in some of my discussions, and you tell me if I'm, lost in space or maybe flying over the target here, is that a lot of the restrictions, as you say, limits that were placed on us, a lot of kids in my generation didn't necessarily like those restrictions. Therefore, when they became parents, they didn't value, what it actually did, the rationale why they did that. So they're determined to not put their kids through that.
Right.
And the repercussions of that is, as you just said.
It's been profound. Yes, it has been.
Yeah.
Because they're gonna say, I'm not gonna whip my child, I'm not gonna punish him, I'm not gonna do this. But some of them see later on, once they make that mistake and they don't do that, then they see the difference in how they were reared with their parents and how they were reared now. You know, we didn't have any problem with going outside playing and worry about people
No.
kidnapping kids and all this, because we were a community. And it's not a community now. You know, if somebody, a neighbor yell at your child for walking across his grass or something, you offended by that. I'm not, because I don't want you walking across my grass.
Yes.
You know, so you're you know, the problem that we're having, and particularly, you know, in the African American community as well as some of the other ones, is it's not a community base. You look at some of the other societal people that are coming here from Asia, Africa, and all that. Everybody more or less community based now. You know, they're living in houses together, and they're as one. They're operating as one. They're helping build houses. They're helping get people businesses started, and they're working together as a community. And that's something that we have lost, you know, in the past. And with these kids here, there's no sense of community with them. The parents are working 3, 4 jobs, just try to make it, single moms, and these kids are home raising themselves, or the streets raising them. They're learning about sex and everything else from their peers who don't know anything about it. And that's
exactly. The blind leading the blind. Yeah. I always told my daughter, you can't ask someone for directions who's never been where you're trying to go.
correct.
That's a foolish term. Okay, so that's going to roll right over into my next question, and you really addressed it in a lot of ways, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into that mentality. You
Okay.
know, the cultural aspects that you just spoke of. I don't, you know, whether it's the music, whether it's, you know, the media, the entertainment industry, you know, something is driving that mentality. And if you're not getting it from the parents and the community-based part that you spoke of, I was well into my 20s or into my 30s before I finally figured out that the term, I always wondered, when did we move away from a neighborhood to just a hood?
Mm-hmm.
And that entire connotation of hood, it carries a negative connotation. And I get the slang and everything, but I feel like in the last couple of generations, they've embraced, as they said about, you know, some of the rappers, Tupac and Biggie, that they, you know, the lyrics became life.
Right, right.
So those types of connotations in their mentality, do you think a lot of that is really driving or controlling how they think?
Well, social media is a real big issue now. It's a driving force, because it's now, when something happened, within 30 seconds, you know of it. You know, whereas we, you know, if we didn't read, you know, we knew of nothing that happened until later on. Like Juneteenth. Why Juneteenth evolves? Because it took so long for the information to get out. If we had
Yeah.
days right now with the internet, Juneteenth would have never been Juneteenth, because they would have got that information when everybody else did it, like they do now. So that is a problem in the filtration of information through these kids, that they have it readily available. And now, you know, things can be not as seen. You know, just look at what's happening right now with the new thing that's coming up now called AI. I don't know if
Yes.
you artificial interpretation or intelligence now is a driving force now, where you're gonna have schools making disclaimer telling kids they can't use that or can't use this. You know, you got artists right now who are depicting pictures and stuff. Look at the one with our ex-president Donald Trump going around. They're making it look like he was in the media getting arrested.
Getting arrested, right.
So that information that these kids have right now is very profound, in contrast to what we had, or how we had to get the information. Had to go to the library. We spent time with our peers in the library or studying, where these kids get everything at home. You know, they spend, you know, probably 85% of their time hooked up to a phone, internet, or something like that, social media, and not spending time with their culture, with their family. You know, no one's sitting around having Sunday dinners anymore. You know, it's not a mandatory thing with the kids. That time was used more or less for our family to be able to communicate and let everybody talk and see what was going on. You know, it was mandatory to sit down and have family dinner. Nobody does that now. Everything is on the phone, and these parents are not talking to kids, and that's a problem. And we catch that a lot when we go through our family training with the kids. Is some of the parents don't know how to be parents. You know, it's not a manual. When you had that first child, you didn't know. You learned through trial and error, and it's even more profound now with these products of young mothers having kids, not knowing what to do, and then she didn't had her kid at 16, and now she's 25, and she wanted to go out. Well, the new big mama, she 40, and she in the club.
Yeah, they're both there at the same time. Yeah,
Right.
and the father is somewhere, but he's not with either one of
Right.
them. Yeah, because he doesn't have the skill sets either of being a man or a father or leading that family structure.
Right. Correct.
Which compounds the situation.
And that's a problem. Now, again, you said the neighborhood, but it's also the family structure. Our family structure was, they told us to go to school, get education, get married, have 2 kids and a dog. But it was a family situation. You had a mom and dad, and now we're taking the father out the picture, and that's the biggest problem. And it's not a problem for all, because I didn't have a father in my life, but I played basketball. I latched on the basketball coaches. So I had a father figure, so that made a difference. Some of these boys don't have that, because they don't they don't get them to go outside. Our kids are all allergic to everything because they wasn't outside playing in the grass. They was in the house all the time.
That's a
we
good point.
In the grass, so we didn't have many allergy issues now, and on as many meds as these kids are. And that's another issue too that we still need to probably discuss. A lot of our kids now are overly medicated, and that's a real big problem in the community. And some of it is voluntarily, and some of it is involuntarily, because some parents kind of learn the system. Well, we can get on that later. Just throwing that topic out there.
No. Hey, we can dive into that right now, because it would seem to me, and I've had this and read up on this discussion, that because they are younger parents, when a perceived authority figure, someone within the school, a physician that they went to, prescribes or tells them that their child should be on this, they don't really question it.
No, they don't question it. They think that's what it's going to do, because it's going to calm him down right then and there. But sometimes it calms him down to the point where he needs to be placed in special ed classes, because now he's too slow or he's behind, because they just socially promoted him. That's the word we used back then. Just want to get him out of class. They don't want him 2 years in a row, so they're going to send him on to the next teacher. Then now, he in the 5th grade, but now he reading on the 1st grade level, because he got passed on, and nobody took the opportunity to find out what was wrong with him. As long as he quiet, that's all that mattered. But when he off that meds, they're not finding out what triggered him. He might have been a smart kid that the classes that y'all was in were too bored. He might have known more than what y'all know, and y'all looking at the opposite of him being bad. He bad because I already know this. My mama taught me this at home, and my big mama taught me this at home. So you don't know what the source of that is, and you're assuming that this kid is just bad. All kids that are bad are not necessarily. It's not a bad thing. The wife that I'm with now, she has a son that she always say was very, very bad. Well, he ended up going to Princeton, Ivy League school. Sometimes bad is not a bad thing, and that don't mean they need to be medicated. You need to figure out a way to the energy. Sometimes we're just hyper, and medicine is not the end be all of everything that you need. Okay.
Yeah, they used to say, he just, hyped up on sugar when we were growing up. Now that leads me to another point. When you said that, when you talked about the community, us getting together, there are no discussions, and it ties into my quote and what I want to get into in regards to the mentality of us and the critical thinking, the dissemination of information. You spoke about the media and social media. Well, I have this discussion with people. I have them tell me all the time, these kids know a lot more than we did at that age. Now, to me, there's a difference in knowledge, information, knowledge, and wisdom. They have a lot more information. Most of these kids never heard of a microfiche, so they wouldn't know how to go in there and do that. Yes, they have information. I guess you could say they have knowledge, but like what you're speaking of on the overly medicated, this information is out there. There are papers that have been written on this, Dr. Umar Johnson, Dr. Claude Anderson. I mean, a lot of people have spoke on this. But if you're going to have social media and these other, venues, what are we using it for? And that leads me to the question of who has the greatest influence on these kids? Because obviously, as a parent or their child or their circle of friends, they're not having this discussion. Otherwise, they would already know what you were talking about. So who's having the influence? And you spoke about coaches and people that kind of stepped in and supplemented for you. Where are they in our communities?
They're not around right now. The kids are being raised by other kids at school. That's what they spend the most time with. It's kind of like us at work. You end up having your work family. These kids, because the parents are not involved in school as much as they used to, they don't go by. Or some principals try to discourage you from going up having lunch with your kid in the second, third grade. Um, these kids are getting all their information from other kids. They're telling them what can and cannot happen. Just like they probably told us, but our parents talk to us. These kids are finding out, hey, you can't get pregnant on the first time you have sex, because it didn't happen to them, or just certain different things that are happening. But you get kids that are spending a lot of time with their friends. They spend a lot of time with them on social media, before school, after school, during school. I had my daughter when she first went to school and got her phone. She come home and her battery dead. I'm like, how your battery dead? And you've been in school all day. Well, they're sitting there texting and doing all this with each other. Then we got to figure out a solution around that. Then you can't take the phone. So you have a lot of problems where these kids are on the phone all times of the night talking to their peers, because we as family members, our parents, our grandparents, our aunts, we're not sitting down talking to these kids. And that's a problem. And the parents are not keeping these kids actively involved in things like we did.
Yeah.
My parents didn't have me in piano, but I was in bowling, I was in basketball, I was in choir, I was in a lot of different things that kept me busy. And I tell parents all the time, just like I'll tell a woman that I'm dating, you're gonna deal with a busy man or a broke man, or you're either gonna deal with a child that's gonna be going to a lot of different things and academic stuff, or choir practice or football games, or you're gonna fall in the court. You're gonna be busy either way it goes. It's just which one you want to.
Which one you want to be?
Which one
do
you
you
want to be?
think they see their? Do you think a lot of parents, and we have so many single moms, and I'm not ragging on them by any stretch of the imagination, because the reason they're single moms is because for whatever reason the father is not involved. So that's a two-sided situation.
I appreciate you saying that, because that's not what nearby what we're trying to say. Just
no, in no way, shape, or form. Yeah. They're not doing that by themselves, by choice, all the time. There are all different types of situations. But my question is, do you think they understand, or at least I would hope they would come to understand at some point in time, that their actions contribute or led to the situation? Because I've seen it in court before, and I guess my concern is, as you said, or and I like to say all the time, if you say something to someone's kid, that parent takes it as an insult. So therefore, you have almost put a wall up in regards to your accountability or responsibility.
It tends to desensitize you to the whole situation. So
but you're taking it as a personal insult instead of taking it as, do I need to look at this?
Right. But sometimes people are going to see things from a different perspective than you are. And like I said, the younger parents or the new parents, all they see is someone that's interfering with what's going on with my child, or someone that's having a different opinion. Because again, we all caught up in our feelings, and that comes from the neighborhood. Because if it was a neighborhood and you knew your neighbor, then you know that they're not coming from a bad situation. They're just trying to help.
Good point.
Or if they calling you and say, hey, I see your child going in the house and he got some friends over there. Parents now, the neighbors now not going to get involved with that, because we don't get to know our neighbors like that. We think everybody being nosy, trying to be in your business because you got something to hide, but that's not necessarily so. We didn't have alarm system because we had Miss Betty sitting on the porch. She gonna report.
Yes.
They're gonna let you know what your son did. He didn't come home. I saw him sneaking out that window, sneaking the girl in. But some of them, again, they don't have a manual. They don't know what needs to be done for his kids, and everything trial and error. And it's all about giving the kid what they want, and they think that's going to satisfy and make them be good. And sometimes that's not the right answer. Sometimes kids got to get out and they got to grind like we did, because everything is not going to be spoon fed to them their whole life. What happens if the mom gets sick and she can't give them what they want? Then that's what's going to end up turning this kid to, hey, I'm used to getting what I want. I'm spoiled. I'm used to getting it right then and there. And then that's how they end up stealing, because they're not taught to wait. They don't have the patience like we did. Our parents say, well, you get it when I get paid, you're going to wait till they get paid. And you may or
Yeah.
may not get it, you know, and depending on how many kids you had in the house, everybody don't get a new pair of shoes every time. One go get it on the first, one go get it on the 15th, one go share, you know.
Yep.
But they can't do that because they spend more time trying to ridicule another kid because they don't have an iPhone, they got an Android, you know, because we place more value on material stuff than we have about knowledge with these kids and putting something in their head,
Yes.
feed them,
Yes.
feed them with
And that's
information.
why I read Marcus Garvey, because the philosophy, what you just said is nothing new. This could go back to biblical times. This goes back thousands of years that has been written exactly what you just said. You know,
Right.
kind of how waiting. I don't care if you talk about the tortoise and the hare, you know, it's basically the same type of, you know, in the same genre. But that's
Correct.
not new. I tell them the only thing new here is you. And just to touch on on that and the information that you spoke on, back to the overly medicated situation, and you even talked about the allergies and different things of that nature from the helicopter parents and people not being involved, them not being involved in a lot of things because you played sports and you did all of that because you wanted to.
Correct.
Do you sense that a lot of the kids that are coming through your facility, that they want to do any of these things?
No. These are the most unathletic kids I've ever seen before in my life. You know, we
Oh my
grew up
goodness.
played basketball, football, we played crochet, we played
Yep.
table tennis. You know, we did a little everything. We kind of horseshoes, you know, we did it all because we stayed outside.
Yeah,
These
yeah.
kids,
We even competed in hopscotch.
anything, we played it. You know what I'm saying? We you know. So
Yeah.
kids are just not exposed to the stuff. But some of the stuff that we expose them to at the facility I'm in, the kids start to learn stuff. You know, we got a culinary program there. We have we used to have an auto mechanic shop. You know, all kids are not scholars. All kids are not going to go to a university and get a job. But you know, me and my wife, we have a lot of rental properties in Louisiana. AC, plumbing, electrical, all these guys there, they make a lot of money.
Yes, they're six-figure income earners.
That's right. So you can't negate the fact that you got a kid who say he want to be a plumber and something, you trying to make him be a lawyer. You know, he can be an electrical or plumber, make just as much as some lawyers do. So
Yeah.
we got to be able to energy and get these kids and find out what they like to do. But you're not going to find out what they like to do if they don't get a chance to go around and try different things. And that's what we do in the program is we'll put kids in culinary art. They learn how to cook. We got a welding, a forklift class for them. We got construction. So you got to put these kids in a lot of different things, and you'll find out what they can and cannot do. You know, we've had kids that know how to sing, but nobody let them sing, and then we let them sing. They find out, sir, I like to sing, and we're like, what, you can sing? Oh, come on, we got a choir. You can get off in the choir. So we do all that stuff at our program, but the sad part about it is we try to get the parents to channel it back, you know, back to it. You know, we have a GED program. And, you know, people always say GED stand for the general education for the dumb. No, if you got a kid 18 years old and he's still in the 9th grade, he don't need to go back to high school and be hanging around, you know, 14, 15-year-old girls and all that. He need to go on, get on somewhere and get a job and get off in the community college and move on. So these kids are just not exposed to a lot of stuff anymore because they're in the house, because all they do is stay on the internet all day and on their computer, their phone. You know, it's a sad situation when you go to a table or you just sitting around in a restaurant and you pay attention to, even with some families, and you see everybody at the table on their phone.
Yes.
You know, that's a sad state that we're in. They're not doing, if they're doing this out in a restaurant and you see it and you pay attention to it, what do you think they're doing at home? They're not communicating at all because they don't have that connection. You want your kid to be able to say, hey, mom, I got somebody bullying me. But if you don't build that rapport with them at an early age, then they're not going to feel comfortable coming to tell you that somebody's picking and bullying them in school. And next thing you know, he done went and found out you had a gun in there and he took that gun to school, try to handle it himself.
Yeah, I think that's manifesting itself in ways that we never thought we would see.
Right.
So, you know, on a weekly basis now.
Yeah, everything has a cause effect, and still, you know, the way we were raised, they might say it's old fashioned, but it worked.
It works. Ooh. You are hitting on some things, and I'm glad you hit those programs, because that was definitely something I was going to ask you about. And you just really gave one of the best advertisements for our nonprofit, which is what we do and what we're working with here. With you in the creativity, finding out what they are interested in. I totally agree with you that it doesn't seem that society as a whole, they're trying to dictate where you should go and not what you're interested in. So, and that's one of our prime directives is a program called Creatively Exposed and the Build a Village Project, which is exposing them exactly what you just said, exposing them to these fields, letting them put their hands on it, letting them see what it's like. And that lawyer is going to have to hire a plumber or an electrician or somebody, because that's not what he does.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. So that's very important,
Yes, it is. And I know you had told me about those programs, and there's one other one I believe that you guys either were, you may still be affiliated with, and that was a Cafe Momentum.
Yes, we do. That's the culinary.
Culinary side, exactly.
Yeah, we're very much involved with that, and Cafe Momentum they have a restaurant outside of Dallas County where they serve some high-end meals, and our kids are the ones that are preparing the food, or they're going out and serving these people, and these people know that these are kids in the community, and they're serving $300 plates, to these well-affluent people, and that's where the money comes from. They have a restaurant, minimum restaurant, and these donors, they know that this money that they're providing for about this meal is coming from these kids, and they're preparing these elegant meals and stuff for them. Then they get a chance to partake in the meal, so they're getting a chance to see how the social elite handle things, and how they're sitting there with the dinner napkins, and they'll know. We should take them out and show place settings. Why do they have two? Our kids don't know why there are two forks. It's a dinner fork and a salad fork. So we try to teach all those social skills, not only the boys, but it need to be taught to females too.
That's right. Yeah,
and that's that. Some of the sororities and fraternities are trying to do, blend in with things. My wife, her sorority, they're real big with that. So it's just a lot of things that we got to go back and we got to teach people, teach the young men, also the young women. We can't forget about them too, but they got to be taught too.
Yes.
Yeah,
they have to be taught too.
They got to be taught what a real man looks like, because for them, they don't know. If they sit there and watch their daddy hit on their woman, on their mom, and she stayed with them, they might think that's love, and they get confused with that. And then they think if a man ain't yelling at me or treating me bad, then he don't love me.
Yeah.
Then they look at the guy that's real nice and trying to open doors up for him and give him his jacket and all that. He too soft.
Yeah. So it's a lot of confluation of other people's thoughts or narratives that they place in that we buy into. I had a good friend of mine tell me one time, a coworker, that he was coming out of, I believe, a Walmart one day, and he had his small daughter with him, and she just went to the side of the car, and he went, this is in his younger day, and he went, to get in his car, and he had a guy that said, say, man, he called him like what we spoke of earlier. He was like, what are you doing? You need to open that door for her. And he said initially he looked around at him and he was getting ready to get at him, like what we discussed earlier. And he said, then that man said to him, basically, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, if you are doing that for her, then she will know how a man is supposed to treat her.
That's it.
And he said, man, I stopped in my tracks. He said, I was hot initially. Well, you don't know me. What are you talking to me for? But he said, when he said that, something prevented him. Yeah. And he said, from that day forward, I've opened the door for my daughter and my girl and everything from that point forward.
Right.
And I thought, what a beautiful story.
Yeah, there's little small things that you have to teach them. We used to have the opportunity when I first started working in placement to take the kids out in the community. And I'll take them out one day and we all of us are dressed kind of like hip hop, just dressed down or have our head turned to the back, and we'll go off into downtown Dallas. And we'll go in elevators, and I'll teach them how people start clenching at their purses when they see them coming, because they assume the stereotype that you have that, you're somebody that's bad, and then I'll have just one kid while I'm in the elevator just turn around and face everybody in the elevator and see how uncomfortable people get, because that's against the norm. That goes against the grain. back the next week and everybody got on shirt and ties, and we go get in that same elevator, and then they watch how people compliment, you guys look really nice, this and this, that, and the other. So we used to do a lot of little social projects and stuff like that with kids. And it's actually like hands-on, getting them to see how people view you. Just
Yes.
by dress. You might not be a thug, but you got your pants sagging down and all this and hat turned to the back. That's what society's gonna think. Is it wrong?
Yes.
Yeah, of course it is. But you got to be able to create.
But it's the reality.
Yeah, it's the reality. It is reality. Yeah, it is.
That kind of covers what I want to get into next. And I appreciate you saying that, because that is so important for them to see and to have you directing that conversation, because had that been one of their friends, then they could have basically turned that whole thing around, that you are angry at those people, or you've processed that mentally to basically say, flip them off, and you're going to continue going, as opposed to understanding the way you would present it to them, that this is a choice. Like you said, it may be wrong, but it's the reality. Which do you like better, getting complimented or them,
Exactly.
clutching? So that leads me to, how do we reach them? And you've kind of answered some of this, but the question I want to pose to you is, once they leave your facility and they go back into, their family or community that they came from, back to those same influences and so forth, what tools, do you hope you've provided? And how can people in the community help them, keep them from coming back? What would you tell them? Not what would you tell them? What would you ask of them?
I would actually, here's the biggest thing I've always had with the juvenile department, okay? And this is no knock on Dallas County. I love Dallas County, but here's the biggest problem. All the best services for our kids, guess where they're at? Inside the juvenile department.
Mm-hmm.
More services to prevent these kids from coming inside the juvenile department. We have some of the best therapists and we have some of the best counselors inside the department. It hurts my heart when I get phone calls from parents who got a 14-year-old kid who I know is about to head into the system, but we don't have a lot of programs out there to prevent them from coming into the system. We realized the Scared Straight program and all that stuff, that didn't work, back in the day, or things like that. So we got to come up with some kind of system or programs and those stuff we be able to help the parents. Because all these parents are not bad parents. They recognize when their kids are about to have problems, and they want to be able to help them. But they don't have there's not a lot of resources, or nobody's mimicking some of the things that we're doing or having counseling services for them. A lot of parents don't have high-end insurances where they can go get therapy for the kids, individual counseling, or put them in drug counseling on themselves if they see that he has a drug problem. So, but there are some services out there. So my thing would be is try to provide parents with information and services outside of the juvenile department to help them prevent the kid from coming or staying back in the system. And that's what they don't have it. And we try to provide all the things we can and resources for the kids. We tell them, hey, you have a problem, you can call us anytime. I'll tell them, hey, if you get a graduation, send me a card, I'll be there. I'll come show up. And and that's why I'm doing what I do. I treat kids very delicate. I treat them with respect. Because I've ran into kids before. I was working in a hotel downtown in Addison, and I ran up on a kid who was in my facility. He worked in security for one of the superstars that came off in there, and he carrying a gun. He to me and he's like, I thank y'all for what y'all did for me. Y'all turned my stuff around, and it's not a lot of stories out there, but there are stories. Some kids just don't come back. But there are all the stories are not ending up on a homicide as kids or adults. There are some success stories out there with kids. And we have a thing called Youth Village Scholarship that we've given 2 kids to go to college, and like $2,000 for the kids. I think they gave out like $6,000 or $8,000 this year for our kids to go to college, or they can go to trade school. They can do whatever they want with that $2,000. And we had a bunch of kids that come back. We have our annual thing. I'm going to invite you to it when we have it the next time. They always do Black History Month, and we have all the judges and everybody there. And then they bring back some of the kids and stuff, and then we award scholarships to the kids. And that's a great thing there too, that maybe we can get you involved in. But we had some of the guys, one of the first ones that graduated, and he's talking about what kind of business he owns now. He introduced his wife and his family, and he was talking about how the juvenile department helped him. So there are a lot of success stories out there, but I just wish there were a lot more. I do think the recidivism rate, and that means that kids who complete our program and they go back home and they come back, I think it's a lot higher now than it was, 15 years ago when I was in there. I think our recidivism rate maybe 7%, and now it might be like 17%. So that means kids who leave our program go back before he turned 18 and get back in trouble again. So that's something that needs, that help can be funneled through. And it's just basically just having programs for these kids to do. And it's not necessarily all about sports and all that.
No.
But it's a lot of things that kids like doing. Boxing clubs, you got kids who like to do martial arts, and instead of street fighting, they can go fight and become a professional boxer. There might be some a skill set that they're real good at. But guess what that's doing with it? It's keeping them off the street.
It's keeping them right. And it's at least teaching them some values and some principles within that arena.
65% of my kids who get in trouble, the reason why a lot of them get in trouble, you know why? They don't know how to tell their peers no. Okay, so if me and you are together right now, and you say, hey, Chris, let's go rob a bank. Okay. If I don't have the social skills or the stamina to say, no, I'm not going to rob a bank because I don't want to be seen like no punk or, I'm a mama's baby or whatever, then I'm going to have to go on and go along with you because I don't know an option.
Wow.
Let me tell you when I have an equipment, say, hey, no, man, I'm not going to rob a bank, man, but I'm going to go over here and go lift some weights and stuff. You want to go lift some weights with me? So now I can counter what you just did. And now I'm going to make you have to make a decision. Do you want to go rob a bank or do you want to go work out with me? So I just gave myself an out too because I'm not going to rob the bank with you. I'm going to go work out. These kids not equipped with that. They don't know how to tell them no without saying no. I just told you no, but in a different way. You see what I'm saying?
That is, Mr. Ambers, I don't think that solution, and we were going to get into solutions, that is one that I don't think a lot of people even contemplate. I would be willing to say I'm pretty sure it's not something common that kids hear.
Right.
Not how you just put it.
Right.
And my business partner has mentioned that before, but you don't hear that in a lot of training sessions, that I've been a part of. That option, you're giving them a way out.
Exactly.
That is powerful.
Yeah.
That is powerful.
Yep.
You gave them a way out. Wow.
And I think you go back to what was that, Boys in the Hood, when they did something and Trey didn't go with him and he was mad about it.
Yep.
He gave himself an out. He was mad about it, but he gave himself an out and he wasn't there with them when they had that problem, and our kids don't really know that. They just say, I don't want to look like no punk, so I'm going to go alone. Now, I might not go in the store to rob them, go sit in the car. Well, now they've elevated all that where if you're in the car, you might have been a trigger man.
You might as well be there. Yeah. That's when they get their education in the justice system, because you didn't know that was the case. Now you're trying to figure out how you're being charged. No, sir. The penal code is free to read too. You can see how they tie that in.
Right. They always say if you want to keep something from people, put it in a book.
Yeah, the library is free. The library is free. And when you mentioned the cell phone, as I said, and we're coming to the conclusion that the information is there for you. They're making the choice to only access trivial stuff, because you have the equivalent of the Library of Congress in that same phone that you're watching TikTok and YouTube.
And people fail to realize they're still building libraries. I didn't even know that. I was shocked. I'm like, oh, libraries still, that's great. So some people are still using them. It's just a lot of people are not. Yeah,
well, we're going to do what we can to promote the usage of that library, because I'm going to get to the final piece here, but on that point, the libraries, offering them that choice. You've given me quite a few things that work. Is there anything else that you can think of that we could, as we go through talking to communities and we're working with our programs, that we can encourage them to do to reach these kids before they get to you?
Well, it's still about education, educating these young mothers, educating the older moms or the ones who don't know. It's still about education. The one thing I tell people all the time, I can get a kid who's 15 years old and he got a lot of stuff in him that he's gained for 15 years. I can't solve all those problems in 5 months. You know, I can't correct them. And even some of the problems that I do correct, you know, I might get a kid who come to me and the language in their house is they cuss all the time. So when he's in there with us, he's comfortable with cussing our staff, but that's what they do at home. So if I fix that kid and teach him social skills and I send him back into that same environment, what's going to happen to that kid? He's going to transform back real quick to other ways. So we got to be able to fix both sides. You know, not only do you need to fix the kid, but you need to kind of educate the parent. That's why we pull the parent in, try to teach them some things on parenting skills, and we'll talk to them about the kid and let them talk and see how they handle scenarios and situations, and we try to tell them, hey, y'all need to sit down and have a meal with your son, and how to open dialogue. And kids never felt comfortable. If you ever ask a kid nowadays, who's the most important person in their family? Normally, it's their brother or sister. It's never dad. But our day, it was always mom or dad, because you can always talk to one of them. One of them might have been the disciplinary, but one of them was the counselor. So it was always different. It was your grandmama or your granddad. It was some older adult who you went to for information. And now these kids don't do that. And they don't feel comfortable talking to their parents because the parents are not talking to them. And I wish we get back to the table where we're spending more time with our kids. And you spend more time with the kids instead of letting the kids spend more time with the streets. I think that's the beginning of helping make a difference. And I'm talking about going all the way back to like 6 months, 8 months, you know, start establishing that communication pattern with the kids way back then, that they can have an open dialogue and talk to you about anything. Because the worst thing you want is your kid to have a problem and he don't feel comfortable being able to talk to you about it. That's when they go to the streets. That's when they go to the next level. That's when they end up joining gangs. And then the gang is going to treat them like family. Okay. That's what they say. Not like the hood, like family. You know, these kids are so indoctrinated now with the hood till they type it in Oak Cliff on their thing. You ain't from Oak Cliff. You from your mama. You know, you're not even from Oak Cliff. You know, that's my hood. That's not your hood. You know,
that is correct, sir.
The mentality that they have, and we got to change some of that. And you know, and that's part of the problem. And there are a lot of resources out there for parents, but sometimes it's just an amount of knowledge. You know, there are a lot of scholarships that go undone. I had one of my fraternities looked on Facebook the other day. They got like a $3,000 scholarship, or a couple of them. Nobody's applying for them, and they try to beg people to apply for these scholarships.
Yes,
there's a scholarship out there for somebody who got one eye. There's somebody for a scholarship out there who got a big chin. There's all kind of scholarships out there that go unnamed every year. That's the same thing with knowledge that we have in the community. You know, if you have information and you're not getting it out to people, you're doing the service. You're doing the community a disservice. And that's what I wish we can do for as a community, is to get information out. You know, start catching these young parents at early stages. You know, just like they sit there and they learn. Going back to the medicine real quick, and I know we're about to close it out. Just like they sit, you know, parents, they teach the parents the wrong stuff. You know, and
that's
and parents, they're getting information from the streets too. So you know, when they put these kids on meds, you know, one of the driving forces behind the meds too. You know what's going on, also, right?
Oh, please inform me. I think I know, but I'd like to hear it. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
If you have a kid that's on medication, they can apply for SSI, get a $702 check for each kid you have on medication.
Yes.
Parents don't know about that.
Yes.
You know, so they teaching the wrong thing to them instead of trying to figure out how to get the kids into a better situation to get them off the med so they can progress later on. You know, so we just channeling our information on the wrong channel. We need to switch the channel and get back to the basics.
We are talking about the exact same thing in that regards. And that takes me back to, you know, the Marcus Garvey quote, you know, we have to free ourselves. They're not going to free you, as you said. You are more than a source. You know, you are not only an income source, you know, we are culturally trapped in a lot of ways for things that are not who we are.
Correct.
That the perception and the narrative has been set, and now we are just playing along with that, the mentality, the information, the knowledge, all of these things. And it seems to me what I'm taking out of what you're saying, and this is just my extrapolation, is we're going to, those of us who have this mentality or this mindset, we're going to have to potentially take the brunt of them feeling offended, if you will. And I tell my audience all the time, I'm unoffendable. You can't hurt my feelings by the definition of the word, but we're going to have to take that in order to have this conversation. Because if we remain silent, we're contributing. We're allowing them to continue. If a kid never hears what you just said about this is a way that you can get out of this by inviting or saying this, help you build that strength. If we don't speak up about it, not telling people what to do, but in a way that, you know,
give them tools.
Yes, trying to give them tools and present it to them in a way where they might initially get upset, like my partner almost did.
Yeah.
But hopefully that seed, if we don't throw those seeds out there, if we don't try to plant those seeds, then they'll never grow.
That's correct.
Okay. You provided us with some solutions. Is there any, so we know what we do to try to support you guys in donations. Is there any other way that people in the community can support, that, or any of the programs that you have, that you guys offer?
Well, we do have volunteer programs and everything we're looking for.
Okay.
Sometimes we just want your time. If you got a church community out there and your church is looking for a program with our kids, we have to allow for them to be able to fellowship, worship. And we're not talking about just a Baptist church. We're talking about Methodist or what have you. Presbyterian, if you got someone that want to come out and they want to do Bible study with the kids and they want to become a volunteer, we welcome that. Our volunteer base has really, really fallen off over the years. We used to have a whole bunch of volunteers. And, if you want to volunteer to come in and teach a kid how to do crochet or knitting or just some hobby or something that you do that you're passionate about, but you're teaching them something through education and you're pouring off into them. We welcome that. We can always use volunteers, for different things that we have, or like I said, we're dealing with the church, or you got some other things that you do that you feel that we're an asset to the kids. We had someone that some ex-gang members or people went to prison, they would come in through the ministry and talk to the kids and mentor them. We have a group now, some people who got in trouble, and they're like wealthy business owners. And once a month, they have a ministry, and we take the kids out and they feed them during lunchtime at a nice restaurant in Carrollton. And they get a chance to minister to them. They have a guy for about 30 minutes who talk and tell his story and how he got in trouble back then and where he's at now. And that's why these guys are like millionaires and they got in trouble. But it's just a ministry. I forgot what it's called. But it's a business leaders ministry that they have, and they give back, and they invite us every month, and we take different, like 6 to 8 kids, and they sit up and talk to them about things and give them resources and stuff. So we definitely need volunteers. We've gotten away from volunteers. COVID, kind of killed a lot of it, but that's something that we do. Just volunteer your time. If you don't have any monetary donation, time is something you can never get back, and that's just as precious as money. So that would be, I would say.
That'll work, and we will post up some information. Our organization is called the Urban Economics Institute, and you can find our website at UEINP for nonprofit.com, and we will post any contact information that you give me, how people can reach out to you for that volunteer information. We will definitely speak about everything that you talked about, your different programs. We will put Cafe Momentum up there and anything else that you would like for us to share. And we will definitely continue to engage with you as we have in any way that we can help. And our primary focus is we're going to take that message that you provided me and this audience today out there. It's not just going to stay on this show. I can tell you that. It's not going to stay here. We're going to take that out there to communities all around the DFW area and outside, you know, across the country, hopefully, is the goal to share that message. Not trying to put you out of a job, but if we could and there weren't any more juvenile facilities needed, you know, I hate to do that to you, but I won't say I'd be real sad about that. But that's a dream. You know, we'll keep hope alive. But I'm very glad that that you took the time to speak with me, Mr. Ambers, and I'm really, really glad that men like you and your other co-workers are out there doing this, really trying to help these kids. And I hope that our audience, you know, that checks this out will feel the same, and that it will move them to kind of take the suggestions and thoughts that you gave and implement them at home before they get outside of the home.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, David, for allowing me to share this information. And I appreciate everything you've done for us.
Well, hey man, me and my boy, my business partner Anthony, like I said, he was part of that as a kid, and he's one of those success stories. You know, thanks to that program, thanks to his mom. You know, we are small business owners. We're doing this, and this is just a small way for us to give back. But we appreciate you all giving us the opportunity to do that. We're getting a heck of a lot more out of this than we could ever give. So I appreciate you, and we will see you and your crew tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Look forward to it.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Ambers. I appreciate it, sir. You have a good day and a good weekend, and thank you for coming on.
All right. Bye-bye.